One of the things that we need to address is, of course, how you define risky. Equity is sometimes an add-on or a silo. And to the title of what we're talking about today, I presume you're here because you like the word disruptive that's in the title. How do we figure out how to get much more rigorous and disruptive about how we address philanthropy? The more risky thing is if you're not actually looking across any policy that you're putting forward and any area of work and doing rigorous analysis around what the equity implications are and figuring out what you're either doing about it or who you should partner with to address it. The folks that are most and best positioned to address the power and might of the lobbying of the oil industry are the leaders of color themselves, and we've seen them do it in places like California. So let's be careful about what we think about as risky.
What capitalism also does, which is silo and separate communities, separate people from one another in more individualistic, more siloed, more competitive and disciplinary tracks. I have a colleague once who told me that Venn diagrams are actually the most radical thing on earth, that if you could convince people about the overlapping issues that all at heart have to do with the same questions of justice, right? And it's about racial justice, and it's about the struggles of poor and working communities. And movements are long haul projects. You're not going to see these same kind of small measurable outcomes that, again, are also market-based measures ultimately from business models, right? Like philanthropy really did adopt a lot of business models of outcome measurements in the 80s and 90s. So long haul grant making, right? We know that to create a new program for a nonprofit to take on takes sweat equity and labor and people's time and energy, and there's still no funding to keep the doors open and to keep the accountant running and to keep, to keep the show rolling. So I think, looking at the Just Transitions framework, Movement Strategy Center's version of it basically maps ideas about how we need to understand the world and the integration of, as you were discussing, Danielle, labor issues, racial justice issues, environmental justice issues are all deeply interconnected. And we need to make that case, and we need to invest in making that case, right? So I think another space I would say is kind of investing in really not just the research, but the storytelling and the way it becomes a much more pressing public story with alliances behind those stories being told.
Process is just so critical. And of course, our environmental justice leaders tell us that EJ is not just a policy, it's also a process. And some of the best efforts I've worked on are where we have, during my philanthropy times or when I was receiving from foundations, when the foundation said, we want to find a way to have some kind of coming together. What would that look like? And what resources would you need to get there? And what kinds of trusted intermediaries and facilitators would we need to get there? And what would that cost? So that the process from the beginning is shaped in a way that helps to empower the communities that are there, rather than I had a great idea as a foundation person and let me go invite some people, right? And that's when often you end up with problems. And as we think about the power dynamics that need to change, it might be helpful, not just on the grant making side, but the endowment side, to have an advisory board that includes members of the community, because there is a lot of wisdom that can come from them in terms of asking them, who are the corporate villains that you're facing? And let me make sure that we're not funding them somehow, inadvertently, or that we're doing something in our investment to support the companies that might be good and might be doing great work as well. So those are just a few things I would mention as we think about corporate power.
If we look at what movements measure in terms of their own success, and push foundations who care about the environmental justice movement to actually listen to communities about those incremental measures of success in their own work, and take those on as opposed to the foundation top-down approved measures, you might get much further to supporting and funding these disruptive approaches to change. So one example is measuring the strength of relationships. Measuring the strength of relationships organizers have in their communities in a block by block basis. Measuring the strength of relationships organizers have with other coalitions. that can help them lift the issues they care about. Another measure might be measuring their lateral accountability. How much are they actually accountable to the people most impacted by the issues, which is another value of the environmental justice movement, right? Lifting the voices of those directly impacted. So how much are the organizations directly accountable to those most impacted by pollutants, by water issues, by environmental justice issues, as opposed to what in philanthropy some call, movements become upwardly accountable when they receive so much funding and so much packaged programmatic funding. They cease to be accountable to those most impacted. Now they're upwardly accountable to funders and higher level policymakers.
I think scale and speed is what we need. And also to tell the stories of where communities have battled and won, like in California, where EJ groups helped defeat oil companies trying to say that, the global warming bill was bad for their jobs. And they were like, not so fast. You really don't care about our jobs, but they got the resources to do that. And so if others have stories as well that they've seen of telling the story about impact, even given scarce resources, I think that's an important piece as well.